Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Makaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. May all be happy, may all be free from disease, may all realize what is good, may none be subject to misery. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning, friends. I wish to welcome you all back from our recess. And for those that may not be aware, Swami Satyamananda is still in India and he'll return in about 1 week. And in the meantime, we are opening up 1 week before he returns. So we will still have classes now on Wednesday night and Friday night. Toward the end of this month is Swami Niranjanananda's birthday celebration. And so I thought it would be an appropriate opportunity to talk about him today. And so I called the title of today's talk, Swami Niranjanananda, Sri Ramakrishna Soldier. Why his soldier will become apparent as I proceed. Swami Niranjanananda, well, actually his birth name was Niranjan, and Nitya Niranjan. For those that people always ask, well, what do these Swami names mean? Well, Nitya means something that is eternal, permanent, and Niranjananda, or Niranjan, means something that is pure, stainless, without blemish. So his name, his birth name, means something that is eternally unblemished. And that was exhibited in his character, but he also had some flaws in his character that seemed to suggest that that name might have been more of an aspirational name. So we will get to that shortly. He was born in a small village outside of Calcutta in 1862. As he approached his teens, his parents sent him to live with his uncle in Calcutta. Now, his uncle was basically head of a spiritualist group where they practiced mesmerizing and tried to develop their occult powers. And they were proud of some of their powers and abilities. But they discovered that Niranjan made a good medium. And so they kind of used him as a medium for many of their, I'm not sure what you call them, shows, or what you call them, anyway, the performances. But Niranjan was rather proud of having that kind of recognition. And he thought it was like a great adventure. And the spiritualist group heard about Sri Ramakrishna and his spiritual greatness, and they thought they would come and see if they could mesmerize him or hypnotize him, because it would be, if possible, it would elevate their status in their, I guess, occupation. And so they showed up to meet Sri Ramakrishna. When they arrived at the Dakshineshwar temple, he wasn't there. And he was informed that, oh, he's at one of the neighbors' homes, Jadu Malik. So they went over there, and every time Sri Ramakrishna goes there, there's always an audience. So they felt, well, this is a great opportunity. So they introduced themselves, and they introduced Niranjan, and said, he's really good at mesmerizing, and he's like, we would like to mesmerize you. And Sri Ramakrishna was rather childlike, and he said, okay. And but when he heard that, oh, we are spiritualists and we don't do that, Sri Ramakrishna's first response was looking at Niranjan, because he was the youngest person there, and he said, shame, shame, don't get involved in such spooky business. But despite this, the spiritualists wanted to try to mesmerize Sri Ramakrishna. And it seemed like they tried for quite some time and were not successful. And they remarked, oh, sir, you are a great soul with a strong mind. We're not able to mesmerize you. And the master was not surprised. He just got up, and when he approached Niranjan, he said, why don't you come back here? So, but Niranjan, he went back with his group, and there are times that people want miracles. They come back, they approach such people. I mean, it's like going to a fortune teller or ask for someone to help you overcome an illness and so forth. And someone knowing about Niranjan approached him and said, I have great difficulty sleeping. I haven't slept for 8 years. Can you help me? And Niranjan felt very compassionate toward him after hearing his story and said, well, I will try. And he did so. And he himself says, well, I don't really know if I helped him, but the man seemed to leave satisfied. But that experience kind of created a sense of disillusionment in him, because people were always coming to ask for some kind of favor, some occult thing to happen, so they would get some favorable position or favorable health situation. And he started to realize that people are chasing all these worldly dreams and money and so forth, trying to acquire all this wealth, and yet they are suffering mentally. And then he kind of concluded that, maybe there's something more to life than even spiritualism. And that kind of like created a sense of yearning to say, well, start to search toward God, acquire some devotion toward God. So he went back to Sri Ramakrishna, this time at the Kineshar. And the master remembered him when he arrived, and he said, my boy, if you allow your mind to dwell on ghosts, you will become a ghost yourself. But if you fix your mind on God, then your life will be filled with God. And then he asked Niranjan, which one do you choose? And so Niranjan said, well, of course, the latter. And so Sri Ramakrishna advised him to sever his connections with the spiritualists, which he did. And then he also gave him some other advice. He said, comparing the love that man has, and comparing the difference between the love that man has and the love that God has. He said, if you do 99 good things to a man and one bad thing, that man will remember the one bad thing and basically cancel you out. But if you commit 99 sins, and you do one good thing to God's satisfaction, he will remember the one good thing. So he asked him to remember that. Niranjan, of course, was much impressed, and he returned a few days later. So much so that he actually wanted to spend a few days with him, unbeknownst to his uncle. And when he arrived, when he met Ramakrishna again, Ramakrishna basically was so happy to see him. He rushed toward him and kept entreating, when are you going to realize God? When are you going to do all these spiritual practices and all this? And Niranjan was totally taken back, wondering, why is he so enthusiastic that do all these spiritual practices and strive right now to realize God. You know, I thought, why does it have to happen all of a sudden? And this is an example of, well, the difference between God really wants you to approach Him, and because that's what's most important in life. And so we use this as an example that this Sri Ramakrishna is expressing his love without any ulterior motive, because why would someone be encouraging you to strive now to realize God, and he's not asking for anything in return? And you don't feel that he's asking anything, but still Niranjan was questioning, why is he doing this? Why is he behaving this way? Because he had not really experienced that kind of outburst of, I would say, unselfish emotional love. But he ended up staying there for a few days, which really kind of upset his uncle, because he didn't inform his uncle where he was or what he was doing. So basically, when he did get back, his uncle gave him detention, said he couldn't go back, but after much entreatment, he finally said, okay, go there, because he knew about Sri Ramakrishna. And I guess he had to also be told that he's no longer going to be a medium. So I guess there was no longer any point on trying to hold him back. Now, Sri Ramakrishna recognized Niranjan as one of the Ishvara Kotis. That means one of the direct disciples, or one of his disciples that is eternally free. What that means is that he is, and basically, I guess, in his subconscious, he is aware that he is divine, but he hasn't actually had the full spiritual awakening of that yet, but it would not require much effort to do so. And so Ramakrishna, most of those, what we refer to as the direct disciples, not all of them were of that caliber, but a certain percentage of them were. I think maybe 5 or 6 or so out of the 12 or 13. But Sri Ramakrishna recognized his purity, his desire to stick to the truth, his steadfastness, and he had a very heroic and very opposing body. He was very athletic and quite strong. He was also very good-natured, but he also had a violent temper. And as he got to know the Master, he got to respect him more and love him more, became more attached to him. And one day when he was going to the Dakshineshwar via a ferry boat. Ferry boat means probably not very wide. It's just carries a few passengers at a time. But Niranjan overheard, because the ferry is going toward the Dakshineshwar, some of the passengers were saying, commenting, giving some remarks about Sri Ramakrishna, saying that, oh, he's a hypocrite. He's just eating nice food and living in a nice temple. And he's also making disciples out of gullible schoolboys. And so Niranjan got quite upset, and he asked them to stop speaking to him, stop speaking about Sri Ramakrishna like that. And they ignored him, and he threatened them again. They ignored him again, and he decided to rock the boat, and he said, and he was just threatening to capsize the boat midstream if they would not, and they begged his forgiveness. And Niranjan, well, he wasn't worried because he himself was a very strong swimmer. When he got to the Dakshineshwar, he told his story to Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna scolded him and told him that anger is a deadly sin. You ought never to let it carry you away. And he said, the seeming anger of a good man is something different. It is no more than a mark across, no more than a mark made on water. And it vanishes as soon as it's made. And he said, as far as those mean-minded people who talked against me, they weren't worth getting into a quarrel with. You could waste your whole life in such quarrels. Think of them as no more than insects and be indifferent to what they say. And then he said, see what a great crime you are about to commit. Under the influence of this anger, think of the poor helmsman and the oarsmen in that boat. You were ready to drown them too, and they had done nothing. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, reading this, you might say, well, that's the basic teaching for everybody. But he had another disciple, Jogan, who later became Swami Yogananda, and he asked Yogan to clean out some of his bedding, and there were some cockroaches in there. And he was told to go out, take them outside and kill the cockroaches. Well, Yogananda, oh, pardon me, no, different story, sorry. We'll rewind on that one. Yogan also had to at times take the ferry across to Dakshineshwar. And he also heard comments about Sri Ramakrishna, adverse comments. And he himself was of a more gentle nature, which is depicted in the story about the cockroaches, because even though Sri Ramakrishna told him to kill the cockroaches, he just set them free. And when he told that to Sri Ramakrishna afterwards, he got scolded for that, for not listening to what his guru just told him. And he said, you know, when I'm not here, you're just going to let your mind fly away and do whatever you want to do. You have to learn to obey the words of your guru, because that helps control the mind when you most will need to. So anyway, he comes back, or he listens to the rebuke, but he says, oh, what do these people know? They're ignorant. They can say what they want. He just let it go. And then he was proud of that, and he went back, and that was mentioned to Sri Ramakrishna, and he scolded him for not standing up for his guru, that he should not accept such abuse about his guru, and should voice his opinion and stand up for it. So here we have the contrast of teachings. So we have to remember that Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are specific to the person. So you have to understand the situation, and also, even as we as spiritual aspirants have our different temperaments, not everyone is given the same teachings. So sometimes we read these stories and we think, oh, that's the final story, but the final teaching, but it's not. It's just one of the teachings for a person of that temperament. One of the main teachings that Sri Ramakrishna always repeated so many times was that that one of the great spiritual obstacles in life is lust and gold. In other words, lust and greed. And he always remarked that Swami Niranjanananda is not attached to anything. He professed that he would not marry. And any money that he received or earned, by earning I mean he took on a job more to support his mother, not to support himself, but he would use that money for poor patients or for the poor. He would not be hoarding it for himself. And Sri Ramakrishna said, you know, I see him seated on a light. So he wasn't attached to anything. He didn't want a married life. He didn't care for the money. He just wanted to realize God. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he always kept a close watch over what his disciples were eating, sleeping, meditating, their day-to-day behavior, and I would always be coaching them along. And he would say that self-control and truthfulness are indispensable in spiritual life. And once he was seeing Niranjan eating a lot of ghee, which is clarified butter. And it's believed that eating too much ghee increases one's lust. So he asks, so he tells Niranjan, "My goodness, you eat so much ghee. Are you eventually going to abduct people's daughters and wives?" And that so embarrassed him. He immediately apologized and stopped eating all that ghee. So toward 1885, that's when it became known that Sri Ramakrishna had throat cancer. And in order to kind of like keep him away from the crowds and all the activities of Dakshineshwar, they decided to move him out of the main temple and into a rented home just outside of Calcutta in a way to kind of like give him time to recover. And Niranjan became his gatekeeper. But Niranjan, I just mentioned, had this anger streak, and he was known to be very stern and protective, very calm and compassionate to those that he felt he should be, but otherwise very protective of Sri Ramakrishna. Because the hope was, by keeping him carefully isolated and undergoing treatment, he will eventually get cured. At that moment, they did not know it was cancer, but it evolved to that. The diagnosis came a few months after that. But they thought he would get better. Now, in the meantime, Ramakrishna has gotten the attraction of many devotees. People wanted to visit him, but they would meet this Niranjan at the door and be turned around. And so Girish Ghosh was one of the was a famous actor and playwright in Calcutta at that time. Sri Ramakrishna would often be invited to some of the spiritual plays, and many of the actors and actresses would also become attracted to Sri Ramakrishna and would feel devoted to him, and they would visit him at Dakshineshwar. But one particular actress wanted to visit him at Shampurkur, where he was staying. And so she came up with the idea with, well, let's put on a disguise. And so she disguised herself as an English gentleman. And with the help of another devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, the two of them went toward Swami to Niranjan. And Kedar, who is the friend there, introduced this gentleman as a gentleman that wants to meet Sri Ramakrishna. And since they were Kedar was known to Niranjan, he let them go through. And they went to Sri Ramakrishna. Kedar explained that this is, I think, what's her name, Bodhini? Binodini. She was an actress. She played Chaitanya in most of the plays. And it was revealed that, she's in disguise. And Sri Ramakrishna was so thrilled to have seen that amount of devotion. Niranjan was very embarrassed once he heard the story afterwards, because the two of them left afterwards and he didn't know anything happened. And then when he was told the story afterward, he decided he should be more careful. So people were trying to get through, but they had to devise different means. And there's some other stories I'll come to. Well, it seems that when he was diagnosed with cancer, that they decided that the air is too smoggy in Calcutta, and he was moved further out to a place called Kasipur. Now it's at this place, the Kasipur, that basically he passed away. It's where he spent the last few months. He was only there for about 6 months. And again, Niranjan was the gatekeeper, but even more sternful than before because of what Sri Ramakrishna told him. Because during the last 3 or 4 months of his life, Sri Ramakrishna became even more emaciated and almost unrecognizable. And he mentioned that, you know, if any devotee that comes to see me now, if they see me in this condition, they will attain liberation, but that will also shorten my life. So Niranjan decided that he will be even more vigilant, and he will, about his guard duty, more to the point where he would actually injure people. So, but he accepted this as some unnecessary duty necessary to protect the master's life. Like I said, everybody tried to prolong his life. Niranjan the master asked Niranjan one day, if I were cured of my disease, what would you do? Now, these last few months, his disciples, knowing that there seemed to be no cure, but they felt that if the master really wanted to, he could cure himself. So he's asking, well, if I could cure my disease, what would you do? And Niranjan got very excited, and he said, well, then I would uproot that date palm tree in the garden. And Ramakrishna, knowing his heroic nature, was overwhelmed with love and devotion to his disciple, and he said, yes, you could do that. But that was not what Ramakrishna's plan was. Because he knew that at some point he would have to leave, but he wanted to keep his disciples united, because he knew what kind of work they would have to do in the future. Now, I mentioned that Niranjan was the gatekeeper. Well, all kinds of people wanted to come in and see him, all the devotees he had met, and some of them were had mental problems. There was one mentally ill woman who wanted to come in and visit him. She used to visit the Dakineshar and would sing, and Sri Ramakrishna was particularly enchanted by her singing. And she wanted to visit him again. She was a Vaishnava devotee, and she was sometimes problematic. She came to the door and Niranjan refused to let her through. But then one of his brother disciples decided that, well, let me escort her to well, actually hearing about this, the master sent Sashi, who later became Swami Ramakrishna, to go down and escort her to him. This kind of upset Niranjan a bit, but he let her go. And after Ramakrishna blessed her, she left. But then she thought, oh, that means I can come more frequently. So she started coming more frequently, and Niranjan was even getting more unbending in his attitude. And she was causing a lot of distress to the other brother disciples because they didn't know what to do. Because she was subject to be very unpredictable and also exhibited some kind of violent behavior. So they were not sure, should they let her in, or keep her out. But eventually it seems that she was discouraged from paying too many visits, and most of the other disciples, Rakal, who became Swami Brahmananda, he expressed his sympathy for her and said, yeah, we all feel sorry for her, but she causes so much annoyance and so much trouble for all of us. And then Niranjan, hearing that, said, well, he just said, well, you feel that way because you have a wife at home. But Rakhal, he sharply replied, well, such bragging, how dare you utter such words in front of Sri Ramakrishna? But the master didn't say anything. He appreciated both attitudes. He appreciated the compassion that Rakhal had toward the underprivileged, but he also appreciated the obedience and the discipline that Niranjan had. So he could not scold or say anything about either one of them. And during the winter, this was like in December, January, Ramakrishna would bathe and take a bath in hot water. Niranjan would have to boil that water. You collect wood and boil water in a big tub. And Sri Ramakrishna felt he was using too much wood and kind of scolded him for that. He said, what is all this waste? And but Niranjan was very stubborn. And so he said, well, he just carried the whole vessel of water up to Sri Ramakrishna and said, well, I brought it to you, now you have to take a bath. So, and during this whole time, even while serving Sri Ramakrishna, Niranjan always worried about him. And when he finally passed away, Sri Ramakrishna finally passed away in August of 1886. And at that time, they were trying to distribute, they were trying to do the cremation, collect all his, collect the, what they would call relics, things that Ramakrishna used to touch or use in his daily life, and it was considered auspicious to keep one of his relics as a reminder of their devotion to Sri Ramakrishna. And some of those relics, or perhaps many, are now with Bellarmine. Some were also distributed around different centers. I think perhaps many centers have at least one relic of something that he would keep in the shrine area or under some place, some sacred place. After Sri Ramakrishna passed away, his disciples got together in that December, or the following December, pardon me, and they took their final vows for monastic life. And Swami Vivekananda he was the head of the group basically, and he gave Niranjan the name Swami Niranjanananda. They had, since they were so poor, because they had to move out of that rented home that they were staying in, they ended up in an old dilapidated building that they called Purana Gormat. And Niranjan, being very strong and austere, was doing much of the laborious work, all the heavy work around the place. And he would often go out to, he would also be doing some daily worship, and he would go out to get some prasad or food that would be offered to Sri Ramakrishna in the shrine as a daily offering. And he bought some sweets, and a mother and child saw him coming with the sweets, and the child noticed the sweets and cried to his mother, I want some sweets. And the mother obviously recognized that he was a monk, and the child was looking at those sweets, and Niranjan said, sure, have the sweets. And the mother, feeling so embarrassed, said, but these are for the offering to the Lord. I can't accept these. But Niranjan said, offering these sweets to the child is as good as offering to the Lord. And so he gave them to the child, and then went and bought sweets to take back to the temple afterwards. So he could not refuse any request. That's another thing. If you asked him of anything, if you asked him for any kind of help, he would oblige. So much so that he would take care of any monk that became sick, he would take care of them. So he took care of his brother monks when they were suffering from smallpox, from pneumonia. He nursed Swami Yogananda from smallpox and Latu from pneumonia. And he also helped some of the other householder devotees up until their death. So he would run errands, he would do all those kind of things for them also. And he also had great devotion to Holy Mother. So he would help her out a lot. In fact, when Sri Ramakrishna passed away, Holy Mother was revered as much as he was by all the brother disciples. So they would take care of her also, and he became like her bodyguard. Now, after Sri Ramakrishna passed away, the monks were kind of undecided what to do with their lives. And many of them wanted to follow the old traditional wandering life of an ascetic, Niranjan being no different. And that's what they were doing while Swami Vivekananda was in America he attended the World Congress of Religion and introduced Hinduism to the West. And he also got messages went back and forth about how the monks were doing, how he was doing. And of course, the monks were very proud of him, of his success in America. But he also sent back advice of what he wanted them to do while he was away. And Niranjan traveled to many places, and he eventually settled in what is known today as Sri Lanka. And Swami Vivekananda heard that he was wandering around kind of, he wasn't sure, he wasn't as steady as all the others were. So he thought, well, he's in Sri Lanka, why doesn't he study Buddhist scriptures and learn Pali, which is the language that they speak there? And he said, what is the good of what will come out of all this aimless rambling? Well, but regardless, Niranjanananda, I always have difficulty with that. I'm not sure why. He still continued to preach, but what he preached instead was not so much Buddhism, but he wanted to preach the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. And he got the attention of admirers there, and some of them also wanted to join, and they became disciples under Swami Vivekananda when he returned back to India. When Swami Vivekananda announced that he was going to return by the certain day, Niranjan, in great excitement, rushed to go meet him. And he left for Colombo, because that's where the ship was going to land, and the two of them then traveled through India a bit before returning. And they arrived at Varanasi, Benares, known as Benares. And they wanted to just spend the days as traditional monks, begging for their food, practicing spiritual austerities. And in the process, Niranjan also encouraged a group of young men to enter spiritual life and to practice the ideal of service. So Swami Niranjanananda really accepted this idea of Swami Vivekananda's serving God in man. And so that was what he preached. Even though Swami Niranjanananda, never actually wrote anything, never wrote any books. He never recorded any of his reminiscences. But through karma yoga, that was his practice. That's what he taught. He wanted people to realize God through that, along with devotion. And these young men that he inspired later founded the Ramakrishna Mission Home of Service, which is still in existence today. Now, just a story. A rich gentleman wanted to build a temple, a Shiva temple in Varanasi, in the same city, more to acquire merit than anything else, and he was boasting about it. And Swami Vivekananda heard about it, and he said, well, if he would do something to help and relieve the suffering and the poor, he would acquire the merit of building 1,000 such temples. Well, when that statement reached that rich man, he decided to offer a very generous donation to this Ramakrishna Home of Service at Varanasi. And of course, they would be in great need of this money because they were just trying to get started. But then after some time, he decided to reduce the sum and that he had originally offered. Now, Niranjan, he was adamant about truthfulness, and when he heard that, oh, this is a breach of promise, so this offended Niranjan so much that he rejected the offer outright. He said, well, then you don't have to give us anything if you won't give us that amount, even though he knew it would create great hardship now to get this group up and running. But regardless, this Home of Service is up and running. So now Swami Niranjanananda was approaching 40 years old. Swami Vivekananda died in 1902. Swami Niranjanananda was 40 years old. He passed away 2 years later. More because he suffered from extreme dysentery. All that, the spiritual austerities put such a toll on his body that it just weakened him, and he ended up passing away of cholera. But on his final days, his body also became all emaciated, and he just wanted to be left alone. He wanted to complete that journey. And Swami Sri Ramakrishna once remarked that he always keeps his accounts clear. He will be able to go whenever he hears the call. Now, when he was actually in his last few days, one of his brother disciples, one of the young men that he inspired earlier, had come to visit him to be his attendant on his last days. And seeing his condition, his attendant wanted to be there to serve him. But Swami kept declining his assistance. And then he would say, well, don't you want me to die in peace? He didn't even want the presence of an attendant. And this attendant, being told that, very reluctantly departed. But so the Swami passed away the next day. And so we notice that as we look into these lives of Ramakrishna's direct disciples, every one of them exhibited a very heroic character. And even though he left nothing in writing, he's probably one of the disciples that we know the fewest about. We know nothing about prior to his spiritualist, quote, career. But and we don't know much about what he experienced when traveling on his own, but just people observing him as and his character. So he lived more, he inspired everybody more by his character and his love for Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. So he let his life speak rather than his writings or his words. And each of the disciples has their way of teaching, and this was his way. And so, even though we may not know much about a person, even these small snippets become moments of inspiration, something for us to learn. Even how he managed to handle anger, even at the point where, toward the end of his life, when he was guarding Holy Mother, he was not as stern as he was previously. He would let people go because he understood the value of Holy Mother. So thank you all very much, and that concludes my talk. And I will close with a chant. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Makaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings. Just a few announcements. We are open for all our public talks. We have talks on Wednesday evening, which it looks like I have to conduct while Swami Satyamananda is out of town. So there'll be a gospel class on continuing from where he left off this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Friday evening will be part 3 of Mathur Babu, who is one of the main providers of Sri Ramakrishna's needs. He took care of him during that period of life, during that period of Sri Ramakrishna's life when he practiced some of the most intense spiritual disciplines, which was actually the period of time before these young men met Sri Ramakrishna. So we'll have part 3 of his life on Friday at 7 p.m. here in the chapel and online. Next Sunday, Swami Brahmatmananda, my other brother monk, will give a talk on a yet-to-determine subject next Sunday at 10 a.m. here in Seattle. And Swami Satyamananda returns that following Monday. How he feels when he returns, we don't know, so we're not sure what happens the following week. But for those of you that have signed up for notifications, you'll get later on this week, coming week, you'll know how we will proceed. So thank you again very much for attending.